we are ready to start.
Yeah.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the fourth lecture of the 58th public lecture series of the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. Turning from landscape archaeology to material culture, it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce our tonight's speaker, a dear friend and a researcher with ethos, Dr. Kalliope Sarri, guest postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Textile Research of the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Dr. Sarri studied history and archaeology at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. During her student years, but also later, she worked with several archaeological projects, such as Acrotirion Thera, the Acropolis of Gla in Boeotia, Boeotian Medeon, and Kokounarias on Paros, while she also participated in various excavations of the Greek Archaeological Service in Arcadia and with the German excavation mission at Tiryns. She completed her postgraduate studies in prehistory, classical and Christian archaeology at the Institute of Prehistory and Protohistory of the University of Heidelberg and defended her doctoral thesis entitled Orchomenos during the Middle Bronze Age with the support of the Gerta Henkel Foundation. During her postgraduate studies, she worked for the Archaeological Service of the state of Baden-Württemberg on pottery excavation and processing on the medieval textile finds of the corn-marked excavations in Heidelberg. Following the award of her doctoral title in Germany, Dr. Sarri worked for the Foundation of the Hellenic World at Athens and the Peloponnesian Folklore Foundation. Since the year 2000, she has been working as an independent researcher and prehistoric pottery specialist in the framework of various research projects in central Greece and the Argolith, and has published extensively with a focus on the Middle Bronze Age. She is currently a special researcher at the excavations of the Middle Bronze Age site of Kyra by the French School at Athens and in the Boeotia survey projects by the universities of Cambridge, Durham, and Leiden. Her research over the past few years has focused on the study of textiles and prehistory. She recently concluded a research project on Neolithic textiles in the Aegean at the Center for Textile Research at the University of Copenhagen, having won a Marie Sklodowska-Curie postdoctoral grant. Her main research interests since then include the study of prehistoric pottery, burial customs, textile research, and experimental archaeology. Affiliated as a guest researcher at the Center for Textile Research, she has been participating in EU-funded projects concerning textile research and public archaeology. Closing this introduction, I would like to kindly ask all our participants to switch off their cameras and mute their microphones. Should you wish to address a question or comment to our speaker, feel free to use the chat button on Zoom. You may also switch on your cameras after the end of the presentation to address your question directly to the speaker by raising your hand and unmuting your microphone. Dear Poppy, we very much look forward to hearing about your research and learn all about textile technologies in Aegean prehistory. My colleague, Urania Kuka, and I will coordinate the discussion session following your presentation. The stage is yours. And you may share your screen now.
Share screen. Yeah, I can see some other things here. What is that? I can see YouTube.
Yes, well, yeah. It's preparing. Wait a minute. Yes, that's it. Now we can see your screen.
Okay now. Okay. Yeah. Good evening. I would like to thank the Archaeological Research Unit for the honorable invitation to participate in this year's lecture series. I would also like to thank all of you who have stayed at home tonight to attend the talk. When my old good friends Thanasis Vionis and Urania Kuka asked me to choose a lecture topic, I first thought of talking about a topic related to textiles of a certain period of prehistory, a thematic area with which I have been particularly engaged in recent years. Finally, however, I prefer to expand the topic because, as we will see below, the study of textiles requires a diachronic perspective to be better understood. And this is because textiles are very different from most groups of finds. They are closely linked to multi-dimensional and innovative technologies that with only indirect evidence and without actual textiles do not allow us to recognize the manufacturing methods and the chaîne opératoire to the final product. Often we cannot even guess what the final product was. In other words, for example, we know that the ceramic art was created to make mainly drinking and storage vessels. However, textile craft and its multiple applications were used to make clothing and accessories, home textiles and carpets, sails for ships, baskets and ropes for various tasks. There are, of course, also areas of application where pottery benefits weaving, since most textile tools are made of clay, and weaving helps ceramic art, since fabrics, for example, were used in ceramic workshops to dry vessels, leaving useful technological evidence through their imprints. As we will see later, the dialogue between the two crafts is also expressed at the level of technological launch, where in ceramics, a so-called craft transfer is observed when textile patterns and textile products are imitated or illustrated. Today we will talk about the state of the art in the evolution of technology, the special characteristics, the influences and highlights of the textile art in the Aegean prehistory, with an emphasis on the Neolithic period, which, although it offers rich evidence, is less well known. At the same time, it is also the subject with which I have been particularly engaged in recent years. As in many parts of the world, in the Aegean, we do not know exactly when man began to weave. Especially from Greece, we do not have very early evidence. Due to the organic nature of the material and climatic conditions, real textiles are extremely rare, and so the information we get comes from indirect sources. The picture is quite different from in Central Europe, where the information from the lake settlements has radically changed the knowledge and continues to yield important textile finds. In the Aegean, however, the study is limited to the textile implements, but luckily, in several cases, also to the rich Aegean iconography. The first testimonies of real textile remains on Greek ground are from the cave of Drakena in Kefalonia and from Enthoni in Pieria, where tiny fragments of threads were found. Both of these cases have been announced, but have not yet been fully studied and published. One reason why the textile remains are not treated like the rest of the finds is due to the insufficient knowledge of their preservation at the excavation stage and the belief that they will soon be destroyed anyway. This has changed radically in recent years thanks to the important work of the Greek fabric conservators and the innovative technologies they apply. The clay textile tools of the time are what give us information about Neolithic textile craft. In the excavations, there are many spindle wheels for spinning plant fibers. We must say that at this time, although there are domesticated sheep and goats, these were probably not of the type that would give the long, rich wool for weaving, but they belong to the earliest category of their species that had short hair. The main textile fiber of the time is believed to have been flax, originally wild and then cultivated, but perhaps other plant fibers as well. Recently, there is a lot of talk about fibers made from tree bark. The earliest spindle whorls come from the early Neolithic, where they coexist with spools in settlements like Achilleo, Nicomedia, and Elatia. Their broad discoid shape probably imitates pierced fragments of vessels that may have been the earliest spindle whorls. And while the use of spindle whorls is clear, the use of spools is not clear. Some scholars believe they were used as loom weights on warp-weighted looms, and some others believe that they were used in braiding techniques. In the Aegean during the early Neolithic, the loom weights we know from later times are not present, which means that unlike in the Balkans, the warp-weighted loom was not yet in use. Although all the innovations of the Neolithic seem to come from Anatolia, this type of loom is thought to be a European invention, as it has been present in the Starchevo, Kouros, Kris cultures since the early Neolithic. But evidence can always be revised through new discoveries. So early loom weights were found on the Anatolian coast in the settlement of Ulutsak from the 7th millennium BC. On the contrary, in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Palestine, weaving was practiced on an earlier type of loom that has not left traces in the archaeological record. But let's take some time to get to know the main types of ancient looms. The simplest and earliest, I think, because there's no common opinion about that, about the earliness of the tools, loom type loom type is perhaps the horizontal ground loom, which is essentially a few horizontally placed wooden beams supported on posts. The fabric is created by the warp being wound and stretched on these sticks, and the weaver sits on the ground and passes the weft between, as in the simple tapestry technique. In a more advanced stage of mechanization, they used a heddle rod to lift the threads and create the shed. Simple wooden frames would perhaps have been the earliest form of the two-beam loom that for the needs of weaving larger fabrics became larger and placed vertically. There is also the type of the so-called backstrap loom, where the weaver stretches one end to a fixed point, usually a tree, and the other around their waist. The loom is used still today in regions of South America and countries of the Far East, but there is no evidence that it was ever used in Europe. These looms were already set aside in prehistory when the practical warp-weighted loom was invented, where the wrap is tied at one end to the piece of wood, and the ends of the threads are stretched by the weights to which they are tied. The weight required depends on the fineness of the warp threads. This loom type was a great invention because it facilitated a large opening of the shed and the manufacture of long fabrics beyond the limits of a specific frame. In the Aegean, the first loom weights appear in the late Neolithic II or Chalcolithic period, while we have no samples at all for the type of loom that was used before that time. After the study I did with the textile tools from Sesklo and the Mini, I came to the conclusion, which is more of a simple suggestion, that the first Neolithic loom in the Aegean was probably the horizontal ground loom. And that is because I noticed that some large truncated clay objects that look like the heddle rod supports on some very simple ground looms. We have such examples from Thessaly and Macedonia, and sometimes they are characterized as grill accessories, but this interpretation does not explain the holes in different directions. Some rare ethnological examples give us, I think, a convincing restoration. If you have such objects in your excavations, it would be worth a more careful examination of them, and I would very much like to look at them as for the final conclusion, more examples are needed. Other tools associated with weaving are the awls made of goat and sheep bones cut sideways at one end. These tools are usually interpreted as multi-purpose implements, mainly for piecing, polishing, and peeling skins. Their use in textile production was verified by contemporary ethnological parallels. So here you see a weaver from Peru using a bone awl to symmetrically stretch the threads, set the weft in place, or pick up the right threads to make colorful fabrics. This tool is effective, very effective. This is a personal communication by the weaver to me, because it does not produce splinters, and as time goes by, it becomes even smoother. Another category of finds has been linked to textile art. They are clay or stone seals found frequently and sometimes in large quantities in Neolithic settlements. It is considered that they were used to print fabrics, with a main argument being the existence of similar ones in traditional technologies. They have simple or more complex geometric designs that correspond with the decoration style of the contemporary pottery. I have some doubts about this use of the seals. There are two main reasons. One is that no trace of color have been observed on the seals, something which would be expected. The second is that the surface of these seals is not perfectly flat. In other words, if the designs were used for printing on fabrics, they would not have a clear outline. I therefore believe that the seals were intended for sealing soft surfaces such as clay or skin. They would have a similar use to the early and late Bronze Age seals, for the use of which we are not sure as well. Another area where Neolithic art stunningly touches on textiles is the numerous textile decorations on ceramic vessels. The earliest painted decorations are simple geometric designs, but from the Middle Neolithic, the decorations become complex, and their patterns are very often reminiscent of textiles with woven patterns and counted embroidery. The ceramic styles of the Thessalian culture, but also some of the Peloponnese and the Aegean islands, offer clear examples of illustrated textile patterns, which, with a classical example being the pottery from the islands of Jura and Agios Petros. In some other cases, the potters go even further and depict woven objects, for example, a rug or scarf, woven bands, or examples of patchwork with fabrics sewn together. Noteworthy is a detail on the famous amphora from the Mini, where woven bands have been depicted on top of each other in a very early but successful attempt to represent different layers of depth. These examples demonstrate the abilities of the potters in textile craft, but at the same time, they make us think about the abilities of the weavers to understand basic principles of calculation and geometry, since to produce these complicated patterns and indeed repeat them on the surface, the weaver had to be able to count the threads and fit the symmetrical patterns into a specific frame. In the field of clothing development, Neolithic figurines provide some valuable evidence. Early Neolithic anthropomorphic figurines are naked, but the Middle Neolithic ones show figures dressed in garments with large, colorful patterns. The topic has not been examined as as much detail as it should. And the main reason is that the decorations of the bodies of the figurines were interpreted as full body paintings or tattoos. And while such a possibility is not excluded, some clothing elements are indisputable as they refer to timeless elements of clothing, such as necklines, sleeves, belts, jewelry, and aprons. Another interesting fact that emerges from this research is that women in the Neolithic era, in certain circumstances, might wear pants. This looks clear when the legs of the figurines are shaped separately, and as in the case of Kurotrophos. More obvious is the example of a bead from Frankfurt representing the lower part of a figure with legs apart. The fabric pieces have a band decoration and have been connected in such a way as to create a large angular pattern. This pattern is often found in Neolithic clothing and seems to have been a characteristic element of Neolithic fashion, but is also found very often in Minoan and Mycenaean clothing because it is an easy way to create an impressive pattern from simple striped fabric. The early Bronze Age finds the Greek mainland in a state of constant movement in search for raw materials. It is the time when the domesticated sheep with long hair appears in Europe, which can be used to produce many and much warmer fabrics. It is the time when strong influences from Anatolia are observed. These are traced in the ceramic repertoire as well as in textile technology. Spindle wheels are now larger but rather clumsy, while the use of loom weights was generalized. These are now heavy, cylindrical with one or two vertical holes. At the same time, the presence of some weights of a special shape called crescent-shaped or heavy bananas for some is recorded. They probably come from Anatolia since they exist in large numbers in Troy. This type does not continue in the Greek area, but in Anatolia it continues also into the late Bronze Age, as many examples from Beyces Rutan show. We do not know exactly their use and why this shape was created, but experimental attempts show that they were created to facilitate the opening of the shed and the symmetrical tension. The Cyclades in the early Bronze Age served as a stepping stone for the transfer of ideas and goods to the two sides of the Aegean. It carries these multicultural characteristics while developing a strong local character. The stunning Cycladic figurines that are The most characteristic feature of this culture, however, do not help us at all in the case we're interested in here, since they depict completely naked figures. Thus, from the early Bronze Age in the Aegean, there are no pictorial testimonies. An exception is the seals that often depict woven patterns that may refer to once existing textile products, while sometimes a related symbolism is also included, as shown by the seals from Lerna, with a depiction of a spider, a preeminent living being associated with the art of weaving. In central Greece, in the Middle Bronze Age, we can see very characteristic spindle whorls. They are mainly conical or biconical and often have decorations incised with simple geometric patterns that are quite similar to those of Troy. At that time, there were no textile weights at all, so the existence of the warp-weighted loom can be questioned. This continues in the early Mycenaean period. As in the cases of the early and middle Neolithic eras, we can assume the existence of a weaving device that leaves no traces in the archaeological environment. This phenomenon needs further investigation because it is not about the period where textile weights had not yet been discovered, but about the period when, although the technology of warp-weighted loom was known, it simply ceased to exist. The issue could be related to the movement of people of different origins, but not necessarily from a distant area. However, it could alternatively be explained as a good old normality, which in the early Bronze Age era had been interrupted by the introduction of the warp-weighted loom, and introduced innovation, which however did not last. With the absorption of the imported elements, the use of the old familiar weaving system resumed, and the warp-weighted loom returned, this time to remain to the later phase of the Mycenaean period and beyond. Middle Cycladic spindle whorls have conical and biconical shape like this of the early Bronze Age, like on the mainland approximately. At the same time, Crete is in a very different social situation, since the palatial centers show an intense social stratification and technological organization at the level of mass production. The textile tools, the looms, the loom weights, and the needles compose the organized and multidimensional toolkit of the palace weaver. The Minoan loom weights have many different shapes, and the weight varies a lot, which means specialization and a variety of products. The shape repertoire of the loom weights becomes standardized. The discoid ones with one or two suspension holes and often a cavity on the upper side prevail and are characterized as the main Minoan loom weight type. In an era with great mobility, it is expected to trace artifact traffic. Imported textile tools show that the people who changed places took their weaving tools with them. Thus, we have proven examples where people moved their weights to the new places of residence. In graves, there are also many spindle whorls made of clay or stone, conical, biconical, or globular, but the stone ones, due to their small size, are sometimes difficult to determine as spindle whorls or buttons. A surprise awaited me when, during the study of the finds from Sesclo and Mini, I saw that a wooden piece of the spindle was preserved inside the spindle whorl. This find came from a Mycenaean tomb at Sesclo. This evidence leads us to think that not only the spindle whorls, but the whole distaff was placed in the graves as burial gift. The rich Minoan iconography in wall paintings, ceramics, figurines, and seals give us a very good picture of the textile production and the dress code. The female ceremonial dress of Minoan Crete is depicted in numerous performances. It consists of small pieces of fabric sewn together. The bodice is fitted, short-sleeved, with a deep front opening, and the flaunch skirt, as it is called, consists of successive layers. Common accessories are aprons and belts. Something which is not discussed enough is the possibility of the existence of pants as a female garment in the representations mainly of seals. Liana Stefani collected these examples in her work on Minoan clothing, and I think that it is indeed possible that the ceremonial garderobe of the Minoan women also included trousers. The type of scenes that have a similar setting to the rest does not allow us to distinguish whether this garment was intended for a specific ritual or whether it was worn by specific individuals in the social and religious hierarchy. But what may be worth noting is that the admittedly few examples of female figures wearing trousers often hold infants, a pattern that seems to be common both in the Neolithic and the Mycenaean imagery. Thera makes a great contribution to the knowledge of textile production in terms of tools, other artifacts, and representations that vividly bring the past to life. What Thera has offered, apart from multiple textile tools, is a rich range of clothing elements. The female Minoan ceremonial dress numbers several examples and enlightens us better about Minoan haute couture. This is how we know that transparent clothes, for example, were manufactured, while a silk-worn cocoon has also been found, which, if it is not a random find of a wild species, indicates the processing of silk 1,000 years before its first appearance in China. The topic of the Minoan clothing has been meticulously studied by Bernice Jones, Diana Wardle, Effie Sakelaraki, Liana Stefani, and Iris Zahili, and we can say that we know quite well the pieces of clothing, rather this one, and the way they were put together. Among the Thera garments, I allowed myself to distinguish also some which could be restored as wide flounced trousers. Their finish, like the entire fabric of the garment from the waist down, follows the movement of the legs individually. The interpretation problem is caused by the posture of the figures, who are not usually depicted with the legs apart. But this is my personal opinion, and it has not been brought into literature so far, but I think it would be worth including in an overall review of this topic. Mycenaean depictions on frescoes, vases, and seals show clothing of Minoan type, but generally they are plain and less elaborate than the Cretan ones. The long dress with the colored bands at the joints of the pieces of fabric shows band making, and some intricate patterns show that the tablet technique or another braiding technique may have been used. From the linear B tablets of the Mycenaean and Minoan palaces, we know how the textile workshops were organized. We also learn about the raw materials, the qualities, selected dye colors, and the techniques that were used, and indeed with words preserved to this day in the Greek language. Huge quantities of wool are said to be transported to Knossos for processing in the palace workshops. Workers specialized in particular processes as dyeing, textile embroidery, and fixing techniques. We also know that together with the female textile workers, children were trained and worked in auxiliary services, but also that men with special expertise also participated, and that they were paid with foodstuff. Sometimes their places of origin and even their names are mentioned. The whole picture is very reminiscent, or is a copy of a system of organization of the workshops in the great palatial centers of the ancient Near East. During the early Iron Age, the textile remains increased as the burial customs of the time ordered the burial of cremated bones of the high society members in copper cauldrons, and the existence of other copper objects in burial pyres, where textiles partially mineralized were preserved. One such case is the famous proto-geometric fabric from Lefkandi, which was well preserved together with other fabrics of various materials and techniques. We cannot fail to refer to the textiles from Stamna in Anatolia, a unique find of 3 bronze burial cauldrons with a series of fabrics of remarkable preservation recently restored and exhibited in the new Museum of Messaloniki. They are contemporaneous with the fabric of Lefkandi, and together with it, they compose the fabric, the characteristic of a burial custom which continues in historical times and promises to yield new important finds in the future. Besides their archaeological value, the textiles play a leading role in connecting in an undeniable way the burial customs of the Iron Age with the Homeric poetry, as they provide tangible evidence of what was written by Homer in the detailed description of the burial scene of Patroclus, in a rare meeting of archaeological fieldwork and written tradition. Experimental archaeology has a particular importance contribution to the study of ancient textiles. Weaving techniques, the raw materials of processing and dyeing, the effectiveness of the tools and the reconstruction of tools made of perishable materials, and of course reconstructing the textiles to have a clear picture of the final products can be tested. The relevant research and application have advanced a lot lately, so that not only the techniques and tools are studied, but also the active participation of people, their abilities, and the effect of textile work on their mind and body. Thus, for example, the reactions of the brain during spinning are monitored. This approach has also a social anthropological dimension, since what can be also studied studied is the stress of the human body during work and possibly musculoskeletal diseases in a specific social environment. The last word in experimental archaeology is sensorial archaeology, the archaeology of the human experience. Essential to this approach is achieving of synesthesia, that is the involvement of all five senses working for a comprehensive understanding of technology. This method has applications in the field of scientific practices, but also in public archaeology. I close this presentation here and hope that at least it has become clear why an archaeologist specialized in ceramics is fascinated by ancient textiles and determinedly turns to the archaeology of clothing. Thank you very much. That was it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Poppy, for this extremely rich and very systematic presentation. I was really very impressed by the different categories of materials, of material culture you have used for enhancing your arguments about the style of clothing, about technology, the style of clothing, etc. I think that we have all realized that that the textile technology is definitely an important cultural marker for prehistoric societies, and actually of all societies. There are even among us some fashion victims, I think. Anyway, I was personally, I was very impressed by the beginnings of textile production in the Aegean. I mean, the Neolithic part is